Diana performs heroic acts as Wonder Woman, and she will have to muster all of her strength as she finds herself squaring off against Maxwell Lord and the Cheetah. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve from VALHARTV, and today I'll be reviewing Wonder Woman 1984. This is directed by Patty Jenkins, and it stars Gal Gadot, Chris Pine, Kristen Wiig, and Pedro Pascal. So we start off the movie in Themyscira when Diana was a child, and she's in a contest of some sorts where they have to run an obstacle course around like the island and in a big arena. And we see at one point Wonder Woman cheats. She takes a shortcut, and then it gets pulled out of the race because of that, and she's all upset about it, and they keep trying to tell her that she's not ready for the truth. And that's like an underlying plot for this movie, is the truth, but they don't really explain what the truth is. Then we go to Diana living in 1984, and she's running around the city, DC, I should say, doing good deeds, doing heroic acts, and then she goes and works at the Smithsonian. So we get to see her go back and forth between her job a little bit, and this is where we do meet Barbara Minerva, who's played by Kristen Wiig. Now, she's basically the ugly duckling. I don't know why when a lot of people do time period pieces from like this era or even the 90s, they go back to the ugly duckling story. I'm not really sure what that's about, but she's basically the nerdy girl that has, a lot of knowledge, but she is never noticed by anybody. And people are like, "Who do you know who this person is? Do you know who this person is?" And they're going around asking, and she's like, "Oh, hi, it's me." And it's like, I'm sorry, but people still know who you are if they hired you. It didn't make a lot of sense, especially when we meet her, the person who hired her literally can't remember who she is, and I was like, that's not right. I don't, even if you're the ugly duckling, people are going to remember who you are, especially if they hire you. It doesn't make sense. So, I thought it was kind of weird, but there's a stone in it that they end up trying to identify for some reason. The FBI is like, we need these artifacts identified, in the movie. Well, there's a reason. I don't want to spoil it, but in particular, they want this one stone identified, and they're adamant about that. So they go through, and both Barbara Minerva and Diana make wishes on it. They're like, "Oh, it's supposed to be like a wishing stone or something," and Diana makes a wish, and it brings back Trevor Rogers. It's Steve Trevor, and it's almost like, when you order something off a Wish, you get it, and it's not what you were supposed to have. That's kind of like what they did with bringing back Steve Trevor. She got him off of Wish.com, I was like, oh, it's the generic version. Oh, okay. The whole thing with that, I thought was it works, for the purposes of this movie, but I think they could have done it a little bit better and a little bit differently. I personally didn't exactly like that part, but this is a role reversal now. Like in Wonder Woman 1, Diana was the fish out of water because she had left Themyscira to go to see the rest of the world and help Steve out. So she was the fish out of water. Now it's Steve's turn to be the fish out of water. Diana shows him around, and I thought that was a really good part. Where, especially with the dialogue between them, where they go through and take in all the different sites, and Steve's just amazed at all the advancements in technology and things like that. Especially when he sees a passenger jetliner fly overhead, he's like, "Oh, I want to fly that," and it looks super real. I do like Chris Pine in this, but he's not as good as he was in the first movie. but that's really not his fault. That's more of the script's fault. And then we see, we end up getting introduced to Maxwell Lord. He's like basically the type of guy who's like, hey, invest and you get rich quick. So he goes through and he's trying to make a name for himself and trying to get like to be the biggest guy around, because he wants his son to be proud of him. That's like his whole underlying thing, is to make sure his son loves him and his son's proud of him. And we go through excuse me, there's a few action sequences that are okay, but they're not really well done. You can see a lot of the wire work that they were doing. The CGI really wasn't that great in this movie, and this movie had, I believe, like a $200 million budget. So I was very surprised about that. I only noticed one shot of IMAX, because this was supposed to be filmed for IMAX, but I only saw one scene really where it was IMAX. So I don't know what happened on there. Maybe I missed a couple, but yeah, there was like only one scene that changed to IMAX format. So I was kind of disappointed in that. And, there's like, they introduced like a lot of stuff to this, like magic. They introduced some magic in this that they don't have any setup for. They just talk about it and they do it. And there's a lot of that too, where they have a lot of stuff already in place, but they don't really have a setup for it. They just say, oh, I looked for this armor that I'm going to wear later on in the movie. Or, and I found it and blah, blah. And, and they just went through, and it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. They really did a lot of asking of the audience, where, they asked you to believe everything they were doing. This kind of was like more of a comic book than, like a movie. But I didn't mind that, because I remember the original Supergirl movie. That played out exactly like a comic book, and that's how it was written. And I liked that about that movie, and a lot of people didn't like that. That's why it wasn't a big hit. But like this movie, yeah, it just felt a little more comic bookish than it should have. And the dialogue kept changing as well throughout the movie, which I didn't particularly like. They go back and forth between trying to talk like back in the 80s and then talking modern, nowadays. So I thought that was kind of a little weird. Kristen Wiig playing Barbara Minerva, her dialogue kept going back and forth on that, and everything. So I didn't really like that, but there were a lot of good dialogue scenes, especially between Diana and Steve. There were at least 2 to 3 scenes where they had some really good banter for back and forth, and you could see the chemistry between them, which was great. That was another thing I really liked. And between Pedro Pascal and his son, there were some good moments where they had some really good dialogue. Now, I think they could have chose a better child actor, but again, I think it was more along the lines of the script. There really wasn't a background for the child, and for Maxwell Lord, which I didn't like. I was wondering about that, especially when they delayed it multiple times. Again, like the effects in this movie, there was just a lot of stuff. Like Wig's cheetah, when she actually transformed into her, looked terrible. I mean, it was really bad CGI. And then when she was, and then the costume they had her in just did not look good at all. It did not remind me of Cheetah from the comic books or the animated movies. I mean, I was very disappointed in that. And the one thing that really killed me that they continue to do, and I wish they would stop, is that almost every guy in this movie was a artist. They wanted to do something to women without their permission. And Wig's character was the brunt of it. I don't know if it was supposed to be because of the wish, but even before she wished, it happened, and I was like, dude, not every guy is like that. I'm like, I hate when they do that in movies. That's the one thing that really upset me about this movie. It just they literally portrayed pretty much every guy who talked to Kristen Wiig as garbage, and I'm like, dude, I'm like, that's not the case, including Maxwell Lord. Maxwell Lord did it to her as well, he literally didn't care about her. He used her. And I was like, dude, not every guy is like that. I was like, that's getting ridiculous for every movie. So that was another issue I had with it. There is a mid-credit scene, which I actually thought was pretty good. I actually really like it, especially for who they bring into the mid-credit scene. I was digging that scene. So that was a good one. So there were some good moments in the movie, don't get me wrong, but there were a lot of parts that were dragged out. Like there's a scene where they're trying on clothing, and they're trying to find a fashion for Steve, and it's supposed to be funny, but it ends up not being funny because it's just too long. And a lot of the fashion they used in this was from the late 80s, early 90s. So it wasn't even like early 80s fashion, and almost everybody looked like they were out of a Sears catalog. I thought that was kind of weird as well for this movie, but there's a lot of setups and stuff that they do that they don't actually do. I shouldn't say there's a lot of setup. There's a lot of stuff they talk about in the movie that they just don't do for setup. There's no setup for it. It's just there. Gal Gadot, as always, is good as Wonder Woman. I liked her performance. I actually liked her in the golden armor. I thought that was pretty cool. But it just didn't work because, for me, like, she could have used it better, especially in the fight with Cheetah. It gets ripped up, and she loses the helmet, and she loses the wings, and she just doesn't really do anything. Like, the action scenes in this were poorly done. They didn't look good. They were really just kind of short, and they didn't do a lot of fighting. So I don't know what that was about. I thought was bad, especially for being delayed multiple times, and there were supposedly reshoots, I believe, that they did for it. So it just, I don't know. To me, like, all the CGI could have been fixed up. This had a huge budget, and they just didn't come through. Chris Pine wasn't as good as he was in the first movie in this. I was kind of disappointed in that, but that is not his fault. He is actually a good actor. It was more of the script because they didn't have a lot written for him. Like, they didn't explore the relationship with him and Diana as much as I thought they were going to. She brings him back through a wish, and it just, and they go through it. And they just never really explore it until this one moment in the movie where she has to make a decision. So I thought that was kind of disappointing. And Kristen Wiig, I don't know if she's like, I don't think she was a good casting for Barbara Minerva. Her performance really reminded me of her on Saturday Night Live. Like, her dialogue kept changing back and forth throughout the movie to modern day versus the 80s. And she just didn't really have chemistry with anybody on set, like when she was interacting with Gal Gadot. There was a scene where they have dinner together, because Gal Gadot kind of like is Diana takes like kind of pity on her because nobody really wants to talk to her, nobody notices her. So they go out and have dinner, and it's not really conversation. They just kind of tell each other about each other, and it was the dinner was very awkward. I even kind of was like, oh man, they're dragging this out way too long. It was just really awkward. And I don't know. Her performance really just reminded me of her Saturday night skits that she does. I wasn't really impressed with it. I mean, I don't really know if she's been in a lot of other stuff either. So there might be that. But I think her character really didn't have a lot in the script either, because there were times where I forgot she was even in the movie. But they kept bringing it back, though, where Diane would call her up and say, hey, I need your help. And she's like, oh, okay, I'll help you out, even after the wishes. So they kept trying to keep her in the movie, but there are legitimate times where she's not in the movie for like 10, 15 minutes or more. So I thought that whole thing was, very awkward and very weird about this movie. This movie was honestly just too long. I think it could have been about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the most. Uh, but that's even stretching it, I think, 2 hours. Uh, some of the scenes, again, dragged out and weren't really relevant to the story. I didn't really understand a lot of it either. The plot was all over the place, too. There were so many different things that they did, again, that they didn't set up, but they talked about. It was already established there, and you should have known it, type thing. Uh, the whole wishing thing didn't really make a lot of sense either, uh, and that's not good because that's like one of the main plots of the story. And it just didn't work out right because you can't really grant everybody's wishes, and they literally talk about several movies that they actually kind of ripped off. They mention in it at least a couple of times about different like movies, actual names of movies that they kind of ripped off for this as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but not at the same time because this should have been a fully standalone story based off of the first movie. And I thought this was okay movie, like yeah, an okay movie to a decent movie at the very most. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good, and that was the part that was very disappointing, is because I was looking forward to this movie, and after I saw it, I was like, huh, it's a decent movie, it's an okay decent movie, but it just a lot of it was there was too much asking of the audience to believe all of this stuff, and it was kind of a letdown. I would give this at least 5.5, 6. No, I'll say a 6. I'll give it a 6. It was a decent movie. It could have been better if they hadn't have been all over the place with the plot, I think is the very, very basic of this. And they could have done a different casting for Barbara, or they could have wrote the character better. If you guys like what I do, please hit the like button and also subscribe, as I'll be doing more content each week. Take care for now, everybody.